Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul. In this video, we're breaking down Dr. Sleep. Now, it still blows my mind that in 2019 we got It Chapter 2 and Dr. Sleep as well. I never thought we'd get a sequel to The Shining, and as the years went on, it just seemed less and less likely. That's arguably King's most famous book, and in my humble opinion, it's one of the greatest films of all time. When you've got something that popular though, ideas are going to start to stir, and in the end, the studio and King just couldn't keep away from it. Now, King mentioned the prospect of a sequel in 2009 and launched a vote for what he should write next. The choices were Dr. Sleep or a brand new Dark Tower book, with Sleep winning by only about 50 votes. Don't let them ever say that voting never works, kids. But yeah, that came out on top, and he got to work and began crafting what seemed like an impossible sequel. I actually spoke to Jared Bauer, who has a great take on why this was seen as being an impossible thing to attempt, and he's put it into words much better than I ever will.
Thanks, Paul. Hey, I'm Jared. I make philosophical breakdowns of movies over on my channel, and Dr. Sleep is a fascinating and genuinely rare type of sequel. I mean, it's got everything going against it. It's a sequel to a classic. Tonally, it feels nothing like the original, and yet it's really quite good. But what makes Dr. Sleep truly unusual is that it operates under a fundamentally different philosophy of storytelling than The Shining. Dr. Sleep exists in a strange in-between space. It's both a sequel to King's book and Kubrick's movie, even though Kubrick changed so much from King's novel that King famously hated the adaptation. Flanagan develops plot elements that Kubrick omitted but were central to King's novel, while also recreating Kubrick's imagery, sets, and even casting sorta lookalikes to anchor the film in Kubrick's world. But there are consequences to Flanagan's approach. One could argue it makes the first film less impactful. Kubrick believed that a lot of a story's power comes from keeping things unexplained. In a now famous clip where he breaks his rule and reveals some of his intentions to a journalist, he talks about why he generally avoids doing this.
I tried to avoid doing this ever since the picture came out, because when you just say the ideas, they sound foolish, whereas if they're dramatized, one feels it. But I'll try. I mean, well, that's it. I mean, again, it's the sort of thing that I think is better left unexplained.
In Eyes Wide Open, a memoir by Frederick Raphael, co-writer of Eyes Wide Shut, Raphael recalls Kubrick telling him that things need to remain vague because, quote, when you tell people what things mean, they don't mean anything anymore. And this is a significant part of why The Shining endures. We're never certain what's happening at the Overlook. Are the figures Jack sees ghosts, demons, something about an Indian burial ground?
The site is supposed to be located on an Indian burial ground.
Where exactly is the line between hallucination and the supernatural? Kubrick refuses to answer these questions because for him, the power of the film lies in forcing the audience to live inside that uncertainty. But now that Dr. Sleep exists, a lot of these questions get answered. Now we know they were a kind of ghost hunting Danny for his exceptional steam. And it's worth asking whether this clarity slightly dulls the original's edge, because for philosopher Walter Benjamin, foregoing narrative explanation is one of the most essential tools for storytelling. In his essay, The Storyteller, Benjamin analyzes a story told by Herodotus in his Histories about the Egyptian king Semiramis. After his kingdom is overthrown by the Persians, Semiramis is forced to watch his loved ones walk by in a brutal procession stripped of all dignity. First, his daughter walks by, humiliated and abused. Semiramis doesn't react. Then his son. Again, no reaction. Then finally his servant walks by and Semiramis breaks down into tears. Why? Was this just his breaking point? Was there something special about the servant? Herodotus never explains why, and for Benjamin, that's the point. Any explanation would flatten the story. It's the lack of explanation that gives the story narrative tension and keeps people thinking about, retelling, and interpreting the story for centuries. The tale survives because it resists closure. The same principle applies to The Shining. If you take the lore of Dr. Sleep seriously, there are fewer gaps, and arguably less power to the original. But don't get me wrong, I dig Dr. Sleep. It's honestly amazing, it's as good as it is. But if you want to hear Paul and I talk about a sequel that's, well, not very good, but very fascinating, head over to my channel where we collaborated on a video about one of the most bizarre, ambitious, and disastrous horror sequels ever made, The Exorcist II. Hope to see you there. Thanks for having me on, Paul. And now, back to you.
Thank you there, Jared. And if you want to see our collab where we talk about The Exorcist 2, that's on his channel now. Yay! But for this, King was actually inspired by a therapy cat named Oscar. Staff at Steerhouse Nursing Home and Rehabilitation Centre in Rhode Island noticed that the cat would nap near people who died shortly after it sat next to them. The author was just fascinated by this story and wanted to write about it, which is when he came up with the idea of Danny Torrance working at the same hospital in New Hampshire. Takes things in a wildly different direction, and I don't think anyone brainstorming what they thought a sequel to The Shining would look like would have come up with this idea in a million years, except for Stephen King. The idea of nomadic vampires that travel America sucking the steam out of kids, I don't know where that even comes from, but weirdly it works. The book was then released on September 24th, 2013. When it came to the adaptation, Mike Flanagan managed to land the role, and this was in the wake of him adapting King's book Gerald's Game. He also did the mega hit Haunting of Hill House, and him working in the Shining world was his absolute dream project. This project is actually what he wanted to pursue the most after starting his film career, and I'm so glad he got to make it. While it wasn't a box office titan, it's one of my favourite horror movies ever made. It's got an excellent atmosphere to it, fan service in all the right hats, and incredible performances across the board. Now, because of the legacy of the film and King not really liking it, Flanagan basically had a very difficult task. He had two crowds to please, with those being the big fans of the book and the big fans of the film. However, I think he merges the two sides together really well. I want to work through the book differences as we go through the movie, but I really recommend picking it up if you enjoy the film. I'll also be discussing the differences in the director's cut, which has a number of additional scenes. Anyway, with that all out of the way, very long intro, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into Dr. Sleep.
It was you. She saw your eyes in me, and she'd have to look away.
Now we open with the Warner Brothers logo, which is being stylized to look how it did with the release of The Shining. This is always the way I remember The Shield, with those clouds in the background and not that 3D water tower animation shit we get today. We also have that same bone-chilling music that opened The Shining, but instead of following Jack up to the Overlook, we zoom in on Violet's parents' RV. It's 1980, aka the same year that the first film went down. And whereas Danny got taken to a creepy hotel and locked in for the winter, we see that Violet and her family are on a holiday in Florida. This story was inspired by Stephen King's regular trip from Maine to the Sunshine State, obviously minus the vampires. Being sat there though, he would wonder who all the people in the RVs were, and then came up with the idea of travelling nomadic vampires. And thus the True Knot was born. Aside Pennywise, they're for me the creepiest and scariest of King's villains, and while Dr. Sleep isn't traditionally a scary book or film, the Knot have really stuck with me. There's just tons that we don't know about them, but it's clear they've been around for a long time. They represent the ultimate lengths of depravity that one might go if they had the chance to live forever. Ultimately, they extend their lifespans, but have to lose their soul in the process and end up having horrendous deaths as they cycle. Grandpa Flick is the oldest of the gang, and in the book, he's said to have been around since the Europeans worshipped trees. Flick classes himself as a war veteran, and though we don't know which war he actually fought in first, he constantly updates the wars that he fought in to not draw suspicion from the rubes. Which is what the True Knot call regular people, the rubes. Initially in the book though, he claimed to be a veteran of the Civil War, World War I and World War II. In the book it's explained how the True Knot owns campgrounds around the US, and they have over $1 billion in assets across the globe. They've hoarded endless wealth throughout their extremely long lives, and are very dangerous. Beyond the vampire stuff, they're also a makeshift group of travelling psychics who extend their lives by huffing on steam, which is essentially the essence of children who have the shine. And yet, that obviously doesn't make things good for Danny, but it makes things even worse for little kids like Violet. Now in the opening we see Violet, who's played by Violet McGraw. If you saw Flanagan's Haunting of Hill House, then you might recognise her from that. In the opening, we follow her as she goes to pick some flowers and sees the True Knot's RV. This scene is only in the director's cut, as in the theatrical, we see her coming across Rose right away. She makes a confused, almost suspicious face though, which I think works better as an indication of her shine. Clearly sees that something's off with the group, but can't quite put her finger on it. By the lake, she then comes across Rose singing My Wild Irish Rose by Chauncey Olcott. This scene looks like it's something ripped right out of an old painting, and the film from the off looks absolutely stunning. Now, this scene is inspired by 1931's Frankenstein, where the monster's given flowers by a little girl. The opening of the film, though, is a lot different to the book, which basically has the scene of Danny getting scared of the bathroom. Though that scene, of course, comes right after this, I think this is a much better way to open the story. Seeing the villains kidnapping a child, it just lets you know from the off, not good people. Rose is sort of a siren that lures Violet to her death, and though she's extremely beautiful, there's something very dark and twisted going on there. This just hammers home as well that she's the opposite of what we imagine a monster to be like. But Rose is the worst of the worst and charismatically lures Violet in before kidnapping her. Now you might also hear the Irish twang in her voice.
You're wondering why I'm wearing such a funny hat.
That's because originally Rose is from County Antrim in North Ireland and she's over 700 years old. Though we don't know much about her past, we know she came to America as one of the first pilgrims. She then shows off the hat to Violet, and in the book it serves as an omen of her looming threat. The psychic characters often get visions of it and it signals that she's got her eye on them. In the movie, there's a long pin on the side as well, which Rebecca Ferguson said was intended to cause the maximum pain in children. This scene also reminds me heavily of it, as she gives a gift to the child and even reads her mind. Violet, however, is then put at ease and just told that it looks like a magician's hat. This is also a reference to the book, as Danny thinks the same thing when he first sees it. The magic trick is then used to impress Violet, but it actually distracts her from Rose's friends. They appear out of nowhere like a magic trick itself, and like all good magic tricks, it's all about making you focus on one thing while you do something else. Rose then pulls out a violet flower and eats it, and says,
It's the special ones that taste best.
This lets us know exactly what they plan to do, and watching this scene back after seeing it for a first time, it doesn't look good. Now we learn a bit more about them in the book and discover that in the world, the shine is basically dying out, which is why they need to get the super strong Abra. In the book, they actually get infected by measles from Bradley Trevor, which leads to a lot of them dying on the road. There's long chapters of them desperately racing together, all the while suffering from the disease. This is because they never got vaccinated and didn't really keep up to date with stuff, which is quite a wild way to destroy a villain. When you're reading a book, you know, you don't need big massive spectacles, so it does work well there, but I can totally see for the movie why they just wanted to have them standing around getting shot at. As we learn though, steam is purified and made stronger depending on how much pain the victim feels. So watching this again, you wonder exactly what they put Violet through, especially when you have the hindsight of the later scene. In the director's cut, we then get Violet's mother looking for her and can see they're not leaving the campground. It's awful knowing that the mother will never find her daughter and she'll be another kid lost forever. This of course happens a lot in real life, and it's just so chilling thinking something supernatural might have grabbed a missing kid. Feels very in line with the X-Files, and the killing of children is what makes the Knot just so scary to me. It's just an immensely unforgivable act, which I even see a lot differently now in my dad as well. But yeah, the fact they're willing to target little kids so they can extend their lives, worst of the worst, who never hit the thumbs up, I imagine. Speaking of child murder, we then cut to the Overlook, which is completely snowed in. We then get that iconic carpet pattern and the name of the title. Now, unlike the theatrical cut, the director's cut is arranged into chapters, with the first being Old Ghosts. Gives us the feeling that it's a bit more like a book, and clocking in at 3 hours, yeah, it's quite a long journey. Works on 2 levels, so with it referring to the ghosts of the Overlook, as well as how the trauma of what happened there haunts Danny even after leaving. We then see the iconic Overlook hotel carpet before Danny rides around. As far as set design goes though, it looks identical to the legendary movie, which we have actually broken down on the channel. Now if you're wondering how they got this so spot on, it's because Flanagan managed to get blueprints from Stanley Kubrick's estate to recreate the sets. And this is why it just looks completely identical. He even sought help from Steven Spielberg, who used the Overlook for Ready Player One. Even the way we have doors in places that don't actually lead to rooms, yeah, just brought it across brilliantly. Though we've broken down the impossible layout in our Shining breakdown, if you haven't seen that, just as an example, we see Danny ride past the balcony which overlooks the main hall. Down the bottom of the corridor though, we can see doors lining the side that clearly extend over the hall, so they don't lead anywhere. Just shows their attention to detail though, and how much effort they put into recreating this. Now, though they managed to copy that across, I'm so glad that they decided to get a new young actor to play Danny instead of trying to do some weird CGI de-aging that's all the rage these days. And yeah, I remember going to see It Chapter 2 and also having this, like, watching this around a similar time and being like, well, maybe they should have just left the de-aging because it ain't look fucking good. Now, Danny then stops outside room 237, which you will remember is the heart of the hotel. This is what Dick told him not to enter, and we see the door begin to open. This plays in the idea of locking away ghosts and also opening them up like what we get at the end. In a scene that wasn't there the first time, we then watch the old woman slowly coming out the darkness. Now in the book, the woman in the bathtub was Lorraine Massey, who's an old lady who would seduce bellboys. She took her own life in the bathtub and remained there forever and ever and ever. Now we learn this is a nightmare and see Danny after the events of the hotel. He wakes up petrified, and this is where the book pretty much opens at. Although it doesn't feature the dream, and I think having this little member berry works really well to show how Danny's being tormented by his own hag. Sorry Rebecca Ferguson. And sorry old lady as well, he's a lovely I'm sure. On his covers though, we can see a logging truck, which reminds me of the crash that Dick saw up on his way to the Overlook. That collided with a red car, which is something that we can also see on his covers. Heading to the bathroom, we then see Massey's shadow in the bathtub before she draws back the curtain, just like that scene in the original. The director's cut gives us full on Ghost Bush here, which understandably was cut from the theatrical release. Danny then wets himself when the doorknob's being turned, while in the book, he actually pees in the sink, which is very polite of him. If you've wet yourself though, mate, you've potentially stained your clothes, so why not check out our merch store right below the video. Worst interlude ever there, but we have our Kubrick stare poster on there and also our carpet one as well. Not that kind of carpet, you cheeky bad boy, you've been watching that director's cut you. There's a really cool design detail on that carpet one that I won't spoil, but they're all available below. On top of that, there's extra discounts, so yeah, the more you buy, the more you save. Danny then reverts to how he was the first time he experienced the ghost, and he starts sucking his thumb like in The Shining. It's essentially a revisiting of that moment in The Shining, as Wendy asks what happened, and Alex Esso does a fantastic impression of Wendy. What's the matter, Danny? You haven't hit the thumbs up! She has gone on to be a frequent collaborator of Flanagan's, though, and after this she starred in The Haunting of Bly Manor, Midnight Mass, The Midnight Club, and The Fall of the House of Usher. Left out of the movie is the explanation that Wendy received a settlement from the owners of the Overlook and that she couldn't work due to back problems. We then learn that Danny hasn't talked since they left the hotel, and Wendy goes to check out the bathroom for herself, which is brand new for the director's cut. It's similar to how Jack went to check out room 237, but there's no sexy ghosts this time. She can tell it's real though, as there's wet footprints on the bath mat, which is something that also happens in the book. There it plays in how Dick explains that ghosts leave bits of themselves behind, kind of like burnt toast. Speaking of Dick, we then cut to the next day where Danny meets him at a park bench. The book differs quite a bit here, as Dick Hallorann survived the rescue attempt at the Overlook, and therefore he visits him in person. Wendy decided to call him as he was the only man who'd helped them so far, and she was kind of lost for words with what had happened to her son. For the film though, they've gone with the film continuity, which makes more sense because when you say The Shining, I know for a fact that more people will have consumed the movie. And even I, a big book fan, have went through large parts of my life where I've been like, oh yeah, Dick's dead, isn't he? And then I read the book and I'm like, oh no, he's still alive, because that scene in the Overlook where they kill him just so burned into my head. Dick here is played by Cole Lumley though, who'd also reunite with Flanagan for The Fall of the House of Usher and Life of Chuck. The scene's pretty much the same as theatrical cut, but the director's cut adds some lines from Dick that talks about how powerful his shine was when they first met. Dick then asks if Danny remembers the first time they talked to each other in their heads, which is a line right out the book. I think a detail that the film doesn't really get across is that the pair are actually having the conversation in their mind because Danny's still a mute. Dick then talks about how the hotel fed on Jack's darkness, and the movie is very much about Danny not following in his father's footsteps. Danny, of course, does get lost along the way, however he gets a redemption that his dad never got to have, and destroys a hotel and shuts out the darkness that he couldn't. Even the way they die is in complete opposite fashion, with Jack, of course, freezing to death in that iconic shot, while Danny burns alive in fire. Yay! But yeah, that's all done to subliminally let us know that they went on two opposite paths. Dick then passes down the trick that his grandmother taught him and says that he will then pass it down to someone else, foreshadowing him mentoring Abra. The film's a lot about paying one's debt, and Dick later mentions how he was pulled into Danny's problems and paid the ultimate price. Like, I'm sure the guy was just happy lying in bed with watching the TV with the picture of the naked woman above it. But he had to sacrifice himself so Danny could live, and down the line, Danny has to do the same thing for Abra. This is actually a massive departure from the book as well, as there Danny survives, whereas in the film he dies, and in my opinion it works a lot better as a reflective arc that brings things full circle from that first film. He also talks about his grandfather being a mean son of a bitch. There's a massive section in the book that involves Dick's life as a kid, and it talks in depth about how his granddad used to basically abuse all his family. He threatened them, sexually abused them, and they'd constantly live in fear of what he was going to do next. He actually owned a funeral home and enjoyed causing Dick a lot of pain. The grandfather would even squeeze his testicles and stick cigarette butts nuts in his dessert. Like Danny, Dick was scared into silence as the grandfather threatened him by saying a guy called Charlie Manx would take him away. This is actually a character from Joe Hill's Nosferatu, and Joe Hill is actually Stephen King's son. And the first book is also dedicated to him specifically, which is really nice because it's about a dad who's an author killing his son. There you go, son, have that. Dick even discussed how Dick's father knew exactly what his grandfather was like. However, he turned a blind eye to the abuse as he wanted to get the inheritance, but even after all that, Dick's grandfather didn't leave him a single penny. It was just the last cruel act of a horrible person, and you can imagine that it caused friction between Dick and his dad because he was like, you let me get abused thinking you would get money and didn't even get it. Dick also said he would carry a gun in his waist and would constantly seem like he was close to using it. Something they brought to life brilliantly in Welcome to Derry, which took a lot of the backstory here to flesh out his character there. Dick was over the moon when he died though, which is something we also get mentioned in the book. However, he returned as a ghost, and in the book, Dick came across him sitting naked on his bed with a boner, basically telling Dick to come and sit on it, which was absolutely crazy when I read it. Dick in the movie then explains that his grandfather cut him with his fingernails, and yeah, even in death, the guy was an absolute nightmare. So his grandmother then gave him a box, which he now hands down to Danny. In the book, Dick gives Danny a modern box that has like a fancy keypad, but for the film, I prefer this old looking one that can lock away the spirits, as it just feels something a bit more oldly and otherworldly, if that makes sense. Like if you go to a seance and stuff and they got neon lights and like TV screens, it doesn't look as good. You go to a seance and they've got like Victorian chairs and antiques and tables and candles instead of lights and stuff. Seems a lot more authentic. I think that's what this box is leading into as well. Danny's then told that he needs to build one in his mind after getting to know the box inside and out. However, Danny says he won't shine again as it's very, very dangerous. It's at this point that he decides to keep a low head, and this is how he dodges the true knot. This is also why he later tells Abra to dull her shine. It's a bit difficult though, as the ghosts are reaching out to Danny as they're now starved for energy. This makes him also a mirror of the true knot, and as they're hunting kids, the Overlook ghosts are also hunting Danny. Now I do think it works a little bit better in the book as there the hotel blew up, and I like the idea of the ghosts looking for someone to feed on as they're currently lost and homeless. Dick then explains that Danny can play the Uno reverse card and trap the spirits that come for his shine. Wendy then comes running across to Danny, running like, Danny, where are you? I love the performance again though, and she even nails the run that Wendy did towards the end of the film. But yeah, you can totally see why she'd be alarmed that Danny might be missing, as we also see Violet's missing poster. This reminded me a lot of it as well, as their posters were used heavily in the more recent adaptation. Danny and Wendy then watch cartoons, most notably Bugs Bunny, which is where Danny's name Doc comes from. The pair were also watching cartoons when we first saw them at the start of The Shining, and Looney Tunes is of course also owned by Warner Brothers, so I love that Flanagan even brought that across as a reference. And he didn't even warn a brother. Yeah, the jokes have been pretty shit this video, I apologise for that. They'll be sending you to Dr. Sleep very soon. Anyway, the book of course wasn't tied in with a brand synergy, so there they were just watching Three's Company. And look, we're being thorough. Like the book, Danny then sees Mrs. Massey once more. He shuts the door and gets to work by putting her in his lockbox, and we can see that the lockbox in his mind is located in the Overlook Hotel's maze. This is the location where he conquered his father, and in many ways, this was him beating the hotel, beating the ghosts that had control of him, and escaping the labyrinth it had laid out for him. So it's very fitting that his greatest triumph so far is where he locks up the spirits. Massey screams, but Danny doesn't speak at all, unlike the book, as there he says hello and that he brought her something. I think having him mute though, it's just a great way to focus on the actions, the performance, and what he's doing to finally stand up to this character. He then breaks out of being a mute and tells his mother he's fine, which is right out of the novel, and it's here he says there was a little bit of goo left in the bathtub. But now he has peace and can go and live a very happy life, which I'm very glad to see. Oh, never mind. Yeah, I think the biggest shock for me with Dr. Sleep was finding out that Danny's completely miserable. Waking up with a black eye, he remembers sitting at the bar the night before knocking back shots. It's really similar to when Jack sat at the bar at the Overlook, and this of course comes full circle later in the film. In the book, we actually cut to Snakebite Andy's story, but I do prefer that the focus stays on him. We see that not everything has a happy ending, and he realizes that he's woken up in a stranger's flat. She's puked up in the bed, and this makes him vomit as well, which is when he rushes to the toilet. Thankfully, it's not as stomach churning as the description in the book, which did involve a floating turd. Sleep is shorter than King's recent books, but my god, is it's still as detailed. If you want an in-depth description of a shit floating in a bowl, then this is the book for you. 5 stars, bravo. He then remembers the woman's name, who in the book is called Deanie, and to pull her, he said, "Hey Deanie, squeeze my weenie," which is one for you guys. You write that down, yeah? If you ever meet a girl called Deanie, you've got the number 1 line there that works every single time. He then remembers a guy talking to her, which sets off her agent Danny. The guy who punches him in the book is described as a cowboy, but here he's someone much larger, and it kind of just shows how reckless he is, as this is a guy who could clearly beat the shit out of him. But violence, alcohol and anger are all that his life is, and it all builds out from his traumatic childhood. The idea of becoming his father is then further enforced when Danny goes to town with a pool ball.
You're gonna take.
Now this line about taking your medicine is right out the Shining book. Jack's dad said it as he was beating his mother, which then became ingrained in his mind. He then said it to Danny at the point he fully lost it, and uttered it as he chased him through the hotel. So this is Danny carrying out the cycles of abuse from his father and grandfather. Now his grandfather said this because he worked at a hospital, and Danny of course ends up working at one too. Shining movie didn't really go into it as much, but Jack Torrance was fired after beating up a student. This scene highlights the generational trauma and how a lot of times alcoholism and violence tends to run in the family. We have this constant ideas of sons becoming their fathers, and in the book he remembers this phrase when looking at Deanie's kid. It's in this that he also thinks about how he could kill someone one day, as there's something inside of him.
Shit, I think you killed him. What if you killed him? I hope you killed him. You hear me?
Danny then heads back into the bedroom, and the first thing he does is look for the whiskey. He's completely dependent upon it, and we know that alcohol can dull one's shine. There's also a sign that this woman has a kid, as there's a food pouch next to the bottle. It's the same type that you'd give to a toddler, and it's just sad to see it sat next to an empty bottle of whiskey. Now in the book he had $500 when he started the night, but Deanie convinced him to buy a load of blow. They then went to a dealer to get some drugs, and Danny noticed he had flies flying all around him. As we learn later in the story, this is an indication that someone's gonna die. The more flies there are, the closer that they are to death, but the film doesn't really touch upon how these can be averted. Danny actually saves his friend's life by spotting them, and after an operation, the flies clear up. But yeah, that's something you skip over, and yeah, it just kind of showed the sicker side of Danny Shine, like constantly seeing this stuff. Anyway, this is why Danny spent all his money, and this is why he felt justified in robbing her. In the book, he's more conflicted over whether he should take the cash, but ultimately decides to go Dutch on Yoldi Coca-Cola. Even hears Wendy's voice in his head, but he tells it to fuck off. This is truly rock bottom for him, and it's a scene I think a lot of alcoholics will be able to relate to. Now King actually came up with this idea as he imagined a what if timeline in which Jack had eventually gone to AA. But also turns out that in the movie, Deanie is dead, which is actually quite different to the book. There she's still alive, and though he's haunted by her, it's not as terrifying as what they do in the film. Like the book though, Danny sees Deanie's kid as he's leaving, and he then asks them what their name is. There, the kid tries to go for some of the coke because they think that it's candy. Throughout the novel, he's haunted by him constantly saying, "Candy." And it's a word that plays over and over in his head. In the book, he also notices bruises and thinks about getting revenge by attacking his abusive uncle Randy. I think he kind of sees himself as saving the kid from an abusive life like he had, but ultimately he fails to act. Eventually he surmises that the abusive uncle killed the kid, and that Deanie took her own life shortly after this, which is what's haunting him, but yeah, in the movie I think it just works better keeping it more simple. We then see Dick, who also appeared here in the book. However, the line about him putting the money back was said by Wendy. Danny then attempts to put Dick in the lockbox, and we can see just how many spirits that Danny's locked away. He's hit the point though, he's now being a dick to Dick, and with him doing it to Dick, he's obviously doing it because he's running from responsibility. This doesn't work of course though, thankfully, and Dick then says a line that's stuck with me since the moment I first heard it.
"You can put things from the Overlook away in boxes, but not memories. Never those. They're the real ghosts."
This line unfortunately is only in the director's cut, and I think it's a shame because it's my favourite line in the film. But yeah, Danny knows he should really look after the kid and make sure Deanie's alright, but instead he takes the money and leaves the baby to starve in the apartment. Danny then dashes out of the room, and we can see a poster of Gene Simmons blowing fire, just like the poster mentioned in the book. The novel then fills in a bit more about him, and we learn that he worked as an orderly at a hotel, but skipped town after this incident. After getting a Kubrickian transition, we cut to Abra Stone, who's playing Teacher Children by Crosby, Stills and Nash. However, in the book, it's actually not a second time by the Beatles. I did wonder if that was chosen to highlight the cyclical nature of the story and how we're back in the shining world for a second time. Teach your children is really apt as well though. The first verse is about parents teaching their children to be kind, which is something that Abra's parents do. However, the second verse is actually about children teaching their parents to be kind too. Now though Danny isn't a parent, I think Abra is definitely a character that brings him back from the brink and kind of teaches him to do the right thing again. Either way, in the book, this piano scene happened when she was much younger. Abra's mother received a book of Beatles songs arranged for piano and Abra would listen to it as a baby. Then one night in 2002, she subconsciously played the piano while asleep. This showed that she had a very powerful shine that might even be stronger than Danny's when he was a kid. It was so strong she even managed to predict 9/11, which is something the True Knot attended. They predicted it too and fed off the steam from the deaths in the area. The movie also massively minimizes Abra's family history. The book shockingly reveals that Abra is actually related to Danny. In it, we learn that Jack had an affair with a woman named Sandy Reynolds when he was a teacher. After he was fired from Starvington Prep, she then learned she was pregnant. She then gave birth to Lucy, who subsequently gave birth to Abra. This, of course, isn't in the movie at all, but it kind of explains their connection a bit more as opposed to like the movie which just completely omits it. Abra's great-grandmother Conchetta is also used in the final battle. Danny learns that she has cancer and goes to visit her, and it's here that he finds out about his father's affair and sits with her while she dies. He then inhales her steam and uses this in the final battle against Rose in the True Knot. Abra is then taken to bed, and I like how her room is a similar colour to Danny's, which further shows how similar that they are, or were. The parents then hear the piano playing and go down to see it's doing it on its own. This is Abra reaching to it while asleep and using her powerful abilities to move about the keys. We then cut to Snakebite Andy, who's in the cinema watching Casablanca. In the book, the movie was Raiders of the Lost Ark, whereas here it's Casablanca because that's Flanagan's favourite film. Now in the book, she was abused by her father and then she killed him by using her mother's knitting needles. This then becomes her MO, and she uses sharp objects to leave snakebite marks on her victim. Well, I say victim, I was going to say victims, but they're nonces, so fuck them. In the book, she also has a rattlesnake tattoo on her arm, which plays into her nickname. She lures men in before attacking, but she always makes them take her to the movies first. Now in the book, she meets men at bars, but to update it for the film, it's implied they met online. She puts men to sleep to rob them, and then carves the V into their cheek. When the men see it in the mirror, they then say out loud, "I like little girl." No, I will not. Do not clip that. I'll stop there. However, in the book, she just carves it into their face and says that they'll always remember her. Now, as we see, Rose and Crow Daddy are watching her. Found it funny how Rose actually takes off her hat in the book, but yeah, she keeps it on because she's a total dick and do not wear hats in cinemas.
Stupid hat. Damn it. I paid 15 cents for this ticket.
Now in the book, this was actually Rose, Grandpa Flick, and Barry the racist name for a Chinese person, which I won't say in the video. In the movie, they change it to Barry the Chunk and cast Robert Longstreet in the role. But you're not chunky, mate, that's Dad Bod. Here though, Crow Daddy gets a lot of focus because he's Rose's second in command, and in the movie, he takes Barry you know what I'm saying, he takes his role as a tracker. It was said in the book that he tracked people during the Civil War, and the film makes him Native American to possibly play into his time in a Native American tribe. As Andy exits the cinema, we can also see a poster for someone called Joe Collins. King fans will know this is a reference to the Dark Tower series, and there's also a poster for Dark Shadows, which came out in 2012. Rose then grabs Andy and says,
Well, hi there.
Just like she said to Violet. The fact she says that and resists her powers makes you think that she's going to suffer the same fate as the kid. However, Rose has another idea, and Andy becomes our pathway into seeing what the tribe's like. We then catch up with Danny, who's sleeping under a bridge next to a train yard. Cut from the movie is how he actually ended up there, as he went to buy a bottle of cheap whiskey and ended up stealing a homeless dude's blanket. It just shows how he's lost all his moral character and is selfishly stealing from the already downtrodden to survive. The book explains that he's sleeping under the bridge because he owes a lot of rent and, of course, spent the money on Deanie. Rather than using what he stole to pay for it, he instead decides to hit the bottle. We then cut to him getting a bus, and though the scene wasn't in the theatrical cut, it does explain why he ended up at Teeny Town. We can also see Tet Transit on the arrival and departure boards. The Tet Corporation is a big player in the Dark Tower series, and is something else that's just a neat little Easter egg. Using the rest of his stolen cash, he then goes as far as he can with the money. This takes him to Fraser, New Hampshire. In the book, he actually bounced around jobs across Albany to Martha's Vineyard, but has never really found a place to call home. We then cut to Abra's birthday party. She hands a message on a card, which is what she actually sent to Danny in the book. There's also a magician, and in the book, he was called the Great Mysterio, after like the Spider-Man villain, I'm guessing. Like the book, he then pulls out a rabbit, but here it's grey and not white, and look, we are being thorough. The guy then gets out some spoons and does tricks, which Abra says she can do as well.
I can do that.
That's nice, sweetie.
Yeah, stop ruining the guy's act, love. Trying to watch this shit. But yeah, she makes them stick to the ceiling, which her parents discover in the kitchen. Spoons are a great choice here as well, as they are usually connected to magic and celebrity psychic Uri Geller, who famously bent them. The spoons falling then sends shockwaves across the psychic landscape, and they alert both Danny and Rose. In the book, Danny just had the name Abra come to him, and Rose actually didn't notice her until the murder of Bradley Trevor. Now this takes us into Chapter 2, Empty Devils, which is the name of Part 2 in the book. Unlike the movie, Part 1 is named Abra, but I think the Part 1 title works better for the movie. This section focuses mainly on the True Knot, and it's here that we learn more about them. The name Empty Devils also refers to what Dick calls the group, and it plays in the idea they have no soul or humanity.
These empty devils.
The True Knot are just empty shells of evil who roam the land without any purpose other than living as long as they can. Hey wait, that's me! Inside Rose's RV, we also see Andy's been put to sleep. Rose is dressed slightly different in the book, as there she's ironically wearing a UNICEF t-shirt. This is an organisation that of course saves children, whereas Rose is happy to kill them. The slogan also says whatever it takes to save a child, and you could read that as them saving children for years and years so they can feast on them. And he also says Rose is the most beautiful girl she's ever seen in the world, which is in her internal monologue in the book. Rose then offers her a chance to join the True Knot and to be 15 for a very, very long time. In the book, it's a very funny exchange as she lies and says that she's 28, but Rose knows she's really 32. So it kind of plays in the idea that she's afraid of aging, or at least seeming older. With Andy though, it's quite a tragic story, and due to her trauma, she's been hunting men who like young women. This is something she's clearly had in the past, and up until this point you could see that as being quite a valiant quest, but ultimately she gets seduced by evil, purely because of her own vanity. Andy, like many of us, fears getting older and will do whatever she can to stay young. So ultimately, she of course joins the group that kills kids so they can suck on their steam and live forever. But yeah, it just goes against everything she stands for. This perfectly reflects Danny, who's now trying to work his way back to the man that he was. We then get to him stepping off the bus and arriving at a place called Elm Street. Which, yeah, I think that's obviously an Easter egg about another supernatural child killer. Rose at one point also infiltrates Abra's dream, so I don't really think that's any coincidence. Danny then sees Teeny Town, which is a miniature model of the town with the train. Reminds me of the model of the maze in The Shining that Jack loomed over and gives, I don't know, kind of like an almost otherworldly presence. It's here that we meet Billy, who instantly gets the measure of him. As we pull out, we can see a place called Sherwood's, and there's a model just in front of it, angled exactly the same, which was a nice shot, and I appreciated that even though they don't give it any focus. This is also potentially not to Sherwood Bolton, who appeared in King's Rita Hayworth in The Shawshank Redemption. And we are looking for Stephen King movies to break down next, so who knows where that road might take us. Billy helps Danny get a place to stay, and in the book, Danny knew he'd be living in this old Victorian house as he'd seen Tony up in the turret room window. Billy is paid the first 2 months up front, and we can see that there's a huge chalkboard painted on the wall.
Rent's $85 a week, payable up front.
$85 a week? Mate, get me a time machine! He's told to behave and be quiet, as the previous tenant was a nightmare. This is something that reminded me of The Shining, where Jack was told the previous caretaker was a nightmare as well, that didn't hit the thumbs up, and then killed his family. She also calls him Pop, which is what Jack and his father used to do in The Shining. When asked why he's helping, Billy then says,
"And sometimes I get this feeling about people."
Now, as we learn, Billy has The Shining, and this does kind of play upon The Shining book, where it was said that lots of adults have The Shining and can just sense something about other people without necessarily knowing exactly what it is. The Shining that most people have isn't to the level that people like Danny and Abra do. It's just kind of little intuition things, and we learn that Billy's actually helped lots of alcoholics, so maybe this is what he's used his very small gift for. Say that like it. You've got a gift there, mate, but it's very small. Slagging the lad off. Now, Billy in the movie is kind of a combination of characters, and in the book there's also Casey Kingsley, who's missing completely from the movie. Casey also kind of gets merged with John Dalton later on, and the three friends investigate the appearance of the quote-unquote baseball boy. We then cut to Andy, who's adjusting to life in the camp. In the book, Andy and Rose got very close, if you catch my drift. However, with her being 15, that was of course cut out. Especially because the age difference is like hundreds and hundreds of years. It's her turn to be inducted into the True Knot though, which is pretty much a deal with the devil. In it, she will lose herself in the tribe, and they'll be tied forever, just like a true knot. We then get a ceremony playing out with Carol Struckerman in the role of Flick. You may recognise him from Twin Peaks, The Addams Family, and also Men in Black. He was also in Gerald's Game as well, which Flanagan directed. Further to this, John Dalton's played by Bruce Greenwood, who was also in that film as well. He went to star in The Fall of the House of Usher as well, and in the foreground we can also see Short Eddie. He's played by Matt Clark, who also worked as a medic on Hill House. He then applied to work as a medic on this movie, but Flanagan said, no, sod that, you are acting in it instead, we need to fill up the True Knot. We then have Silence Sari, who in the book has a relationship with Andy. She's played by Katie Parker, who's in Flanagan's 2011 film Absentia. We then see Crow Daddy, and next to him is Diesel Dog, who's played by James Flanagan. And if that surname sounds familiar, it's because he's the brother of Mike. Why can't I get in Hollywood? I haven't got a brother. Fuck you, a brother I don't have for not getting me in a movie. In the book, we learn he's nearly blind with cataracts, but these disappear when he inhales steam. Next to him's Apron Annie, who's played by Selena Anduze, who was also in Hill House. From the book, I got the vibe this was a very, very risky process, and they mention that Andy might even cycle out in it. I think once this process starts, it sort of traps you like a vampire. Sure, you can live forever if you have access to blood, but if you run out, you're gonna die really, really quickly. I think it's the same with steam, and they'll all risk dying horrible deaths if they can't get it. The ritual then starts as Flick introduces the group, which is similar-ish to the book. Rose then unleashes the steam of Violet, and we can see her bracelets around it. It's heartbreaking, and it's kind of like how serial killers often keep mementos. After inhaling it, Rose then breathes it to Andy.
Breathe deep.
Also, love how we can hear the heartbeat in the background, and this sound was used expertly last time to ramp up tension. Annie then gets a bit of a blowback, and her transformation starts. In the book, Annie sees the last moments of Violet's life as Rose kills her while the others stand by and watch. It's a slow motion murder that foreshadows Bradley's death later and lets us know how evil the group she signed up with are. The pain is excruciating, and after Annie survives, she sleeps with Rose, which again is cut from the movie. We then cut to Dan, who wakes up in his room. We see the death flies and then get a jump scare by Deanie. She says they haven't found her yet, and the neighbours were so used to her leaving her son alone, they completely ignored his crying. Which is just awful, awful stuff. In the book, we learn Deanie was eventually found by the super because he kicked the door in after getting tired of knocking. So my wife has just brought me in a lovely latte and some lovely bits of cake, which I'm going to have here. But if you're just wondering why it's that in the video, my wife's just brought it in. Like the video if you like wives. Danny then sees a bottle of booze in his bag. As mentioned earlier, he bought it after leaving New Jersey and was tempted by the whole journey. But having resisted it, it has opened up a new path. Had he showed up drunk, I doubt Billy would have helped or that he would have ever run into him in the first place. But sobriety is changing his life for the positive, and it's a path he wants to continue down. Thus, he knocks on Billy's door. Whoa, mate, that was really quick, that. It was like you were standing right at the door. Well, that might have been the case, and the book explains that Billy's shine kicked in just before this, and he woke up and felt that Dan might be about to do something stupid. He actually kind of sensed he'd just seen Deanie and her kid, and felt, unbeknownst to even himself, that Danny might be about to hit the bottle. We then cut to the AA and see John Dalton leading the meeting. In the novel, a woman is talking about her ex, and Danny's also given a book to write about every single meeting. It's in this that he subconsciously writes Abra's name. Now it's here that we learn that Billy's brother had the same trouble that Danny did, and that Billy basically helped him with his alcohol addiction. He's then given a silver coin, and these represent a commitment and the milestone that one takes when recovering from addiction. It becomes symbolic throughout Danny's journey, and it's there to show that he's surpassing his father. Danny then works out that John lost his watch due to his shine, and the conversation is similar to the book, albeit shorter. The next day, Dan heads to Dalton's office, which is just like Mr. Ullman's in The Shining. Mike Flanagan said that they only did this because it's a job interview in the Shining universe. However, in the book, Dan thinks the same line as his dad did when he was in the office at the start. He thinks, officious little prick, which is the same thing his dad also thought about Ullman. I think it's just a nice little Easter egg that kind of shows that this is a turning point for the characters. For Jack, it was the start of his journey towards madness and death, and though for Danny it's also a journey towards his death, it's more that it comes in the form of salvation instead of persecution. I think it's a way of showing that they're both at this turning point, especially when they're thinking the same thing as well. It also highlights that the legacy of the Overlook looms far over Danny and has seeped into his life in various different ways. It's still a lovely bit of cake, this. Leave this all in. Now, Dalton was actually involved in Abra's chapters as he was her doctor. He investigated the weird goings on with her powers, similar how Danny had that pediatrician there when he was a kid in the first book and film. We then learn that Dan has been helping out in Teeny Town, which is just like the book. However, the movie skips forward and omits these parts of the book, which even in the director's cut, I don't think we need. Danny then gets offered a job at the hospice, which is very similar to the novel, and the fact that his father was offered a job as well. We then cut to Andy, who's woken up after her initiation. She's seeing sandy shores and a beautiful view, and it's a stark contrast to the night she's just had. Symbolically, beaches represent a new beginning as the water comes in and washes everything away. Even marks and writing left in the sand all just get swept away by the tide. Also, I think this is quite a common thing because when my granddad was like dying, he kept coming out of his days of sleeping and would talk about how he'd been dreaming of being on the beach. And I know from speaking to other people that their grandparents also had dreams of them being on the beach, and just seeing this as sort of a new dawn, it did kind of remind me of the conversations I had with him. But yeah, she's basically went through a death and rebirth, and hammering home the idea of leaving the past behind, we can hear It's All Forgotten Now by Al Bowley. This is another link to The Shining, as it's the same song we hear in the Gold Room. Andy is seemingly stunned by what happened, and is then greeted by Rose, who once more says,
Well, hi there.
Andy then says,
I felt like I was dying.
I know. You did.
I think this is a really neat touch with the hello there, as she said it every time there's been someone that she's killed. Now though, Andy has been reborn, and the moral Andy's been killed off and replaced with this parasitic monster. Much in the same way vampires replace the person that there once was. Andy then asks,
Am I still human?
Do you care?
Which is just like what Dick said to Danny. She's then brought to Grandpa Flick and embraced into this little child murdering cult. The hug is only in the director's cut, and we can see that he's covered in liver spots. She's of course only been brought in because they're desperate, and in the past they would have killed her and took their shine for themselves. We then cut to their ultimate target, who's being put to bed. I like how she has this little stuffed animal rabbit, which in the book is named Hoppy. However, it's just a really nice subtle way to play into her future protector, and how his nickname is based around Bugs Bunny, who is of course a rabbit. Are we reaching? You are right, but we're eating cake and enjoying it. Reaching for the cake, if anything. You do kind of get the feeling though that Abra's parents are struggling with her powers, which is fleshed out a lot more in the novel. We then cut to Danny himself working at a hospice, and it's here that we see a cat which inspired this story all along. The cat in the movie actually belonged to the Newton brothers, who produced the film's soundtrack. It's named Azzy, and in the book it's also referred to as Azrael, aka the Angel of Death.
Azzy, come on. Come on. Azzy.
You might also notice that this is in room 217. This is a little nod to the Shining book, as their room 237 was actually 217 in the book, which I feel like I've said thousands of times, but we're being thorough. Danny then finds a good use for his powers as he calms down the patient, and the patient calls him Dr. Sleep.
You're a strange type of doctor.
I told you I'm not a doctor.
Oh, I think you are. Dr. Sleep.
He said it! He said it!
The name Dr. Sleep also nicely plays into his nickname Doc, and we learn in The Shining that Tony was Danny's future self. Tony warned his younger self of the dangers ahead, and I did wonder if the nickname Doc was sent back by him. King would have had to have thought pretty far ahead, but I can imagine maybe him penciling in what Danny may have worked as down the line, especially since his grandfather worked at a hospital as well. In the novel though, this nickname's given by the hospice's administrator, though I do prefer that it comes from a patient. Even if it kind of doesn't make sense that the other patients learn about this nickname, cause the guy dies here and I don't know who he told. We then see the mist come out of his mouth, and in the book this is actually red. This does play heavily into the book's version of the final battle, as red steam's infected while the white is actually the pure steam that the True Knot needs from children. And this is basically why they can't just go around to like nursing homes and just suck that last bit of steam out for months and months and months. And if you were in a nursing home as an old man, I can imagine your final wish might be being sucked on by Rebecca Ferg. Cut that line! In the book though, Danny actually uses infected steam to kill the True Knot, but we will talk about the ending when we get to that. Also, kind of circling back to that idea of 217, I think it's important that it happens here as it kind of acts as a nice sequel to the room from the book. Danny was terrified of entering that room, and Mrs. Massey even stalked him after it. Now though, he's entering room 217 and helping the dead find peace instead of the dead finding ways to torment others. Back in his room, we then see hello written on the chalkboard, and in the book, Danny wrote the names of all the hospice patients and crossed them out when they died. And I would have been doing bets on it. On the morning of Abra's party though, this then gets erased and replaced with the hello we see here. Up to this point in the book as well, Dan has been subconsciously hearing the name Abra and writing it down. I do feel like something like this should have been added in, as it would have foreshadowed the connection and have been a bit better in my opinion, as it seems to just come out of nowhere here. Maybe with the removal of the familial connection though, they felt the need to take it out, but I did, first watch I did find it quite jarring that they just kind of get to know each other, because I would not be going to meet a young girl on a park bench, I can say that. Be like fucking psychic Chris Hansen walking out. You better take a little seat there. No, the True Knot coming. Why did you write hello on the chalkboard? He doesn't talk anything like that. Fucking shit impression. We then go to Danny sitting on his bed, and it sends him back in his mind to the Overlook, specifically the Gold Room. We are now in chapter 3 titled Little Spy, which is the same phrase that Rose later uses to refer to Abra as. We then overhear Midnight in the Stars and You, which played when we first visited the Gold Room in The Shining. This song was also used at the end with the photo, but I feel it's much more applicable here. This scene mirrors Jack's descent as the hotel lured him in with booze. Here though, there's no Lloyd or imaginary well-stocked up fictional bar. However, the temptation's there with that glass on the counter. It plays not only into his father's moment of failure, but also the way his father will be tested later on. But for now, Danny remains resolute, and we learn that he's 8 years sober. There's some fantastic editing here as we see the coin come in, and due to the superimposition, it appears like it's placed over the glass, almost putting a lid on it. We then get a trademark Flanagan monologue, which is something he features in a lot of his projects. I think my favourite will forever be the boat scene in Midnight Mass, and if you know, you know. After the vision of the Overlook, Danny does seem to have reverted a little bit, as he's wearing a blue jumper, just like his spaceship one in The Shining. Then talks about how his dad was 5 months sober at one point, and The Shining has Jack mentioning how he spent 5 months on the wagon. Thankfully, Danny has surpassed that though. He says he only got to know his father by following his drinking and violence, and it's all that he knew of his dad. Now he's gone beyond that in a much more positive way. In the book, we also read as Danny thinks about how he watches all the others giving up their darkest secrets. They all get up, tell the world about it, and all seem relieved after it. Now he wants to tell the group about Deanie, but feels like it's just far too far and that they'll view him as a monster. Every meeting he bites his tongue, and ultimately people can tell that he's holding things back. However, at the end of the book, he eventually tells the story, which is a major moment for the character. All the others, though, just kind of shrug, because it's the sort of story they hear all the time. And basically, Danny realizes he's been holding this back for years for no reason. Now, again, in the book, you know, Deanie doesn't die by his hand, and I do think that they just kind of cut it out of that because of that. But yeah, it's in this that he not only accepts the past, but in accepting it, he also lets go of it. We then see another one of Dr. Sleep's patients, Charlie. The scene plays out just like how it does in the book, with Charlie calling him Doc, and Danny then gives him the same vision in his mind with lovely memories to make the patient not scared before dying. Just like the book, Danny can taste the blueberries and hear the old radio. The pair then sing, "Come fly with me," and it helps Charlie to go to sleep. I love the way this whole scene's framed though, as Danny's now sat there by his bedside. Rather than reluctantly entering his room like earlier, he's now actively comforting and helping these patients pass. Charlie says how he's not afraid to die now, and this is actually a line that's only in the director's cut. But I do think it's quite an important line that highlights how important he is. Charlie then worries about there not being an afterlife, as he says there was nothing before. But Danny reassures him that we don't end and we all shine on. Now, upon returning home, we then see Abra has finally contacted him again and he writes back school. We then see a figure in her room named Emerald from the anime RWBY. She also has RWBY posters on her wall, and at the time, Rooster Teeth were the studio that produced it. They were owned by Warner Brothers, who also made this movie, and the worst thing is, they didn't even Warner Brother. Kylie Curran, who plays Abra though, was a massive fan of the show, and it actually sort of plays into what she does later on. Emerald can create hallucinations and visions, which is what Abra later does to Rose. Emerald also wears a bob just like the character, so she clearly influenced how she views herself when she goes into that astral plane. It's here that we then cut to the True Knot and see they're gonna have a bad time. Grandpa Flick is really unwell, and the book tells us that he keeps crapping his pants. Won't be long until his horrible death, and I think it plays really nicely into the prior scene with Danny. Charlie told Danny he lived a good life, and thus he gets a peaceful and pleasant death. The True Knot die in agony screaming though, and to me, they don't really get to go into a happy afterlife. This is why they constantly try and stay alive, even though they know there's life after death. They know they've done wicked things and will potentially face judgment on the other side. And yeah, even when Flick dies and they all kind of rush towards his steam to get as much as they can, they don't seem like the people who in the afterlife will be like, oh, I've been waiting for you in the afterlife. They're all predators, child murderers, and fucking dangerous. Crow Daddy then goes to Rose, and we can see she's wearing a Red Clay Strays t-shirt. This is a little callback to Danny, as their song Good Godly Woman was used in the bar scene earlier. Now, this isn't to link the two characters, and I think it's just because the movie's producer, Scott Lumpkin, he also has a record label that have the band on the roster, and I think it would have been easy getting the rights to these songs on this t-shirt. As we learn though, Crow Daddy has been looking for Bradley Trevor, and he says that steam is few and far between. They had some 6 months ago, but like the book, Crow Daddy says it wasn't much. In the novel, Tommy the Truck cycled out just before this scene, and they realise that Flick's starting to die. Rose then jokes that he hasn't been well since Nixon, and it plays into how old the group are. Now, Nixon's also a president that she mentions in the book after Crow Daddy says there used to be more of everything. There, the lack of steam is compared to like running out of fossil fuels and stuff, whereas here it's thought to be offset by like cell phones, diets, or Netflix, as he says. But yeah, Rose gives in and says she'll open a canister so we can track another kid. Inside we can see they're running low, as the bottom shelf is full of empty vessels while there's only 3 on the top. Bursting it out, they then end up huffing gas like Saw Gerrera. In the book, the camp owners show up and like, what's going on? Andy then puts them to sleep, which is quite a funny scene. But yeah, just seeing how desperate they are though, it does kind of lay the groundwork for why they go and do such horrible things to Bradley Trevor. Now in the book, we do learn that this steam was from a kid named Richard Galesworthy. He was a boy with a shine who aced every test, and this was because he could read minds. Also love how Rose walks off as well, and it paints her as being above these vicious, desperate vampires. All she's thinking about is how there's one less canister in her RV, and I think she might even prefer the group having a little less numbers. We then cut to Iowa and get the whole scene with Bradley, and Rose actually gets a ping of his shine when they're traveling through the area. It's here that we then see Bradley though, who's played by Jacob Tremblay, and he was chosen purely to shock audiences. At the time, you know, he was arguably the biggest child actor in the world, and for non-book readers, it's like Drew Barrymore dying in Scream 1 or something. He'd of course worked with Flanagan on Before I Wake though, and also recently appeared in Life of Chuck. The game we see here though, that was added for the movie, as in the book we just see the boy walking home. He's also number 19, which is an important number in King's Dark Tower series. We then hear a guy say,
"He hits the ball every time, like he can read the pitcher's mind."
Now beyond that, this is a great cameo, and that's actually Danny Lloyd, who played the young Danny in The Shining. We then see Crow Daddy in the audience, watching just like he did with Andy in the cinema, but instead of recruiting the kid, they're simply going to use him as food. I think him reading the pitcher's mind as well also plays nicely into the idea that people might have used their shine to benefit their lives. Things like acing tests and winning baseball games, you know, they're all stuff that would help you succeed in life. On the flip side of this, though, Danny hid away and deliberately dulled his shine to stay hidden from creatures like the True Knot. Even though he's like far more powerful than these kids like Bradley, it's actually his early experience with the Overlook that made him hidden from their gaze. Because yeah, a kid as powerful as Danny likely wouldn't have lived that long if he'd been levitating spoons in the kitchen. Barry the Chunk then talks to him and offers him a ride. In the book, he just hops in, but yeah, we can see he's quite cautious. That's when Andy steps in and uses her powers to hypnotize him. We then cut to the rest of them preparing to feast at a place owned by Lamarck Industries. This is another King Easter egg, as this is a company from the Dark Tower series. Now this scene is just burned into my brain. I remember watching this at the cinema and just being open-mouthed by how far they took it. It's a harrowing moment in the movie, and according to the cast, they struggled while filming it. You just don't cut away and literally see a kid getting tortured to death. Fear and pain, they're what make the steam purer, and it's in this that they get more of a taste. This is also something that King used in It. There, Pennywise uses fear as it salts the meat, and it's a predatory way to enjoy the kill. Bradley screams, then wake up Abra, and this is when Rose hears her telling them to stop. Abra then begins shaking, and it reminds me of Danny shaking when he was going back into room 237. She then screams and rolls around in the bed, and in the book we discover she can jump into people's bodies. So this is why she feels the pain here. Desperate, she wakes Danny up with the word murder. However, he sees it in the mirror as Redrum, which is an inverse of what he did in The Shining. This is slightly different in the book, as Zari saw it much earlier. The word that first appears when Abra reaches out about Bradley says, "They are killing the baseball boy," which she does later drop on the wall in the movie. I think this change really improves the story though, as seeing Redrum here is much more impactful. Danny's nose also bleeds as well, which has now become almost a symbol of psychic powers in fiction. I first remember seeing it in Firestarter, which was of course based off the book by King. It's then been adapted into stuff like Stranger Things, and nicely plays into this scene too. As for the True Knot, the way their eyes glow as well just exposes the predators that they are. Animals often have eyes that reflect like this, and it just gives them something otherworldly and unhuman. Inhuman, not unhuman. But yeah, it's kind of like how it works in Blade Runner, and it just shows that something's slightly off about them. Flick then stands up, and we can see that his hair is darker, and you might notice that there's a couple going off to have some romance, which is even more messed up. Realizing Bradley's dead, Rose then seems very disappointed that he didn't last that long.
Damn, I thought he had another few minutes in him.
She then thumps away at him, collecting what little steam remains so they can bottle it up. It's just her basically wringing the rag for what's left, and is such a messed up way to close things out. Rose then tells Crow Daddy about Abra watching them over 1,500 miles away, and even with this steam from Bradley, they're just ready for the next meal. Shows how callous they are and how they don't have any remorse over just ending a child's life. Abra is basically going to be sort of like in a heist movie when it's like the job to end all jobs, and they'll be able to live off her steam for decades. Now this is where the movie and book really start to deviate, as it was at this point that we learned Bradley had measles. The movie also leaves out Crow Daddy being worried they could be identified, which is what Abra and Dan successfully achieve. Danny then writes, "I hope you have a good summer," and in the book he writes it from Tony, who was of course his own guardian angel, and himself in the future. But yeah, he's just keeping things anonymous, doesn't want her finding out who he is, as he basically doesn't know if she's definitely who she says she is. We then see Abra tell her mother she made a new friend, but her mother just thinks he's imaginary. Either way, they do this over breakfast, but in the source material, she was buying cheap second-hand books when this exchange happened. And we are being thorough, I read this for a reason. I will point out every word difference.
I know that head of yours is like a radio sometimes.
Now, this is a nod to the chapter in the book Weird Radio. We then see how her powers work as she reads people's minds. Using a computer, she then looks at missing children. In the book, she happened to find a junk mail newsletter that featured the missing kids, but with ye old internet becoming more prominent now, it just made sense to have her doing that. It's here that we then see the listing for Bradley Trevor, and due to the date of the movie's release, the birth dates have been changed from what they are in the book, and we are pointing out number differences as well. Here we see though that Bradley went missing on the 21st of September, which just so happens to be Stephen King's birthday. Abra then goes to her dad David, and we learn that he's a writer.
I won't deny it, I'm a straight rider.
This further enhances the similarities between Abra and Danny though, as Danny's dad Jack was of course trying to be a successful and famous writer. In the movie, she takes on a more proactive role in looking for Bradley's death site, and she witnesses his capture while reading the profile. In the source material, it just came randomly to her, but I do like the increased agency that she has in the movie. We then get a fantastic overhead shot of the convoy and watch as they move like a snake. This plays into their predatory nature and also the fact that they act as one being. The hive-like nature is demonstrated perfectly here, and it creates an almost unbroken line highlighting how they are all one. She then sees where they took him and writes how they buried him with his baseball glove, which is just like the book. Going to her window, we then get a fantastic moment where she tilts the room and witnesses things through Rose's eyes. We can also see a butterfly skateboard hanging on the wall, and these creatures typically represent transformational metamorphosis. This is to symbolize that Abra has now become Rose, and Rose stands at a reflective surface just like Abra. Rose then says her trademark greeting,
"Well, hi there."
And she then takes over Abra, who shouts, "Get out my head!" This is just like the book, and we see Rose blasted across the supermarket. Also, I'm a bit annoyed that they didn't have that Native American food can from The Shining here, but you can't please everyone, I guess. They did have it in Welcome to Derry though, so I appreciate you for doing all that. A touch I love here as well is that one of the workers goes to grab Rose's hat, but she tells her to back off. Rose's hat likely comes from the Great Depression, and it's something that holds a lot of sentimental value. Namely because there were a lot of deaths during that, and she probably sucked up a lot of steam. Rose has lots of artifacts like hats and necklaces and stuff, and these are things that she's collected over her 700 years. They ground her somewhat and remind her of a life she may have otherwise forgotten, because yeah, if you've lived for like 700 years, unless you have like a little memento, you're probably gonna forget it. The hat is also thought to enhance her psychic abilities, and it's meant to be a conduit for black magic. In the book, they burn it after her death because it's seen as something that's connected to pure evil. The text even says it sits on her head at an impossible angle, playing into how it's held there by something supernatural. Rose in the book also has a gigantic tooth which only appears when she's going to feast. It's described as being almost like a tusk, and it's hidden away when she closes her mouth. We also now see she shares the nosebleed along with Danny.
Who's Tony?
Apparently, Danny was in a trance calling for Tony, and it's clear he wants help from a higher power. It also kind of shows he's went back to a more childish state in wake of this terror.
When I was a kid, I didn't understand The Shining. I called it Tony.
Returning to the camp, we then see how desperate that Rose is. Talking to Crow Daddy, he then mentions that they could turn Abra. However, Rose does not want anyone with that power turned into a member of the True Knot. She rules supreme over everyone and clearly doesn't want any threat to her leadership. Now, instead of turning or feeding her, she wants to keep Abra alive and use her as a constant source of steam. This will keep her alive and living in complete agony for all her life, which is even worse than being murdered on the spot. It's also wildly dangerous for the True Knot, as they could end up getting caught, or she could use her powers to basically have them all killed. Rose knows deep down though that they're running out of ropes with steam. Now, much of this conversation was added for the movie, along with Rose's idea of using Abra for years. We then get Chapter 4, Turn World, as Abra heads back into school. It refers to how the world turns when Abra uses her powers, just like we've seen in her bedroom. Abra then has the feeling that she's being watched, and she skips school to go and see Dan. Things go down differently in the book though, as the pair email back and forth before meeting. We see her step off the bus though, and the way we have the Tet Transit here also nicely mirrors the scene from earlier with Dan. Going to the bench, he then acknowledges how sus it is and keeps looking around for that psychic Chris Hansen. Just like the book, she then comes up with a cover story that he's her uncle, which, to be fair, in the book he actually was. This scene of course also mirrors the one with Dick earlier, and he's now become the mentor. Initially, Abra wants to talk in their heads, but he then says,
"Let's use our outside voices, alright?"
He then basically explains what The Shining is and how lots of people possess it to some degree. There's people who come home with flowers when their wives are sad, or do well on a test they didn't study for, or wives who bring their husbands delicious cakes. Something that Dick said to him in The Shining book though, and I'm glad that that line finally made it to the screen. Danny says that a lot of people don't know they shine, and that throughout his life he's only met a couple who did. Now, a lot is missing from this conversation, as her grandmother isn't in the movie, and her connection to Dr. John is also reduced to a single scene. I get having to streamline things though, but I did like Dan's group of friends who help him to fight the True Knot rather than it being just him and Billy. Abra says though that because she can touch things and get visions that she wants to go and get the glove. This will basically offer her a way to find the true knot, and in touching this she'll be able to find Barry the PC name change.
Because Barry the Chunk, I think that was his name.
Yes, it's 2026, so we will say it is his name. Dan then tells her not to shine, and he advises her to dull the power and keep her head down just like he did. He had his own traumatic event because of his powers and doesn't want it to happen to her either. However, as we've said, the only way to really dull your shine is to get yourself mortal, or intoxicated, or sedated if we're being scientifically accurate. This is why the True Knot later drug Abra though, as it's something that will hold it back. For Danny and Dick in Welcome to Derry, they of course hit the bottle, but yeah, as we see, doesn't have a positive outcome, and Danny's not giving good advice here. In the book, the pair then talk at length, and she even uses her power to stop a classmate from coming over to them. The novel also had her looking up his old mentor Dick, who in the book timeline died in 1989. New for the director's cut is also him remembering a moment with his mother in which he can tell she's thinking about Jack. As we later learn, he basically took this thought out of her head and she was then able to look at him, which is why he then goes and stands in the mirror and smiles. Now, as we've seen, reflective surfaces are like psychic conduits that allow one to perceive certain things. Whether it's Red Rum or what Abra did before, that's normally how they're used. But yeah, I did contemplate that it might be Danny looking at himself in the future to see if things are alright. As mentioned, we then catch up with an older Danny and can see that he's reading the magazine Playgirl. Now, he's not a cheeky bad boy, and this is actually a reference to the first film, as it's the same one that Jack read at the Overlook. There's also a subplot in the book at this point involving an orderly who, as we learned, abused the patients in the hospice. Eventually, Danny cornered him and kicked the shit out of him and basically warned him off ever doing it again. It's not really necessary to the plot, but it did still kind of show that Danny still had this violent side within him, as then goes to an empty room, which is where Danny comes across Dick. Plays out differently in the book, and there it's a woman named Eleanor Ollier who Dick used to speak through as a conduit. Here though they simplify, which I think works a lot better, and yeah, why would you waste Carl Lumley when he's absolutely cooking in this movie? I think he does a bang up job of filling Scatman Crothers' role though, and Danny also quotes one of the ghosts.
Great party, isn't it?
Great party, isn't it?
Which later also plays in the movie.
Great party, isn't it?
Come on, mate, you can put more effort in than that. Great party, isn't it? Even I could have done this shit better. Dick then calls this world a dream of a dream and doesn't even realise how many years have passed. But coming back to tell Danny to pay the debt is completely imperative, and he brings up how he came to him in a similar spot. He then talks about the True Knot and touches upon how they're super old and drove caravans across Eastern Europe, which is dialogue that you only get in the director's cut version.
They eat screams and drink pain.
Dick then says that Danny has to help Abra and get what she asked for, which is just like the text. He's told he has a debt to pay, but unlike the book, Dick doesn't tell him to go to his friends. The circle is getting smaller though, and Dick flat out tells him this is the last time they'll meet. It's quite a somber farewell, and it reminds Danny of the debt that he owes. Cutting to Rose, we then see she's preparing to get Abra when Crow Daddy shows her a news article. They work out she's from Aniston, as apparently there was an earthquake there. As we see though, this was actually due to her powers, and thus it's not going to be as straining on Rose because they've got a fair idea of whereabouts she's located. In terms of the movie, these are all additional scenes, and I can see why this was cut, because you don't really need to know like how she found her when she's got psychic powers and can fly across the earth. Rose then reads the article, which is the same as in the book, and decides to go and search for her. Crow Daddy seems to want her to exercise some caution, but like a lot of villains, she has hubris and pride. Now the plan is to enter Abra's mind when she's asleep and basically do an inception to make her hop in the van when they arrive. Meanwhile, Abra's mother says she's going to visit her mother and asks if she's going to pull through. As mentioned previously, the grandmother's a big part of the ending, in the book at least, but I think it still works in the movie having these lines, as it shows her parents accepting her gift and basically seeking comfort in what she knows. Rose then starts to meditate on the RV roof. In the book, she uses steam to help her jump, but I think it works fine without it. And yeah, watching the visuals here just takes your mind off all of that, and it's such a cool depiction of the powers. If you've got an OLED TV as well, then the black levels on the sky are absolutely insane here, and yeah, just one of those standout moments in the film. She seems almost like Peter Pan flying through the night looking to take a kid into her secret world. We then see Abra's house number, which is 1980, which is the same year that the Shining movie was released. We then watch as the house flips, which could be a nod to the book, as this whole thing is described as being on a turntable. Upon landing on the room, Rose then starts going through her mind, which appears like a filing cabinet. And I love how she has one for anime on the left. She mocks her mind and says her mental library looks like a cathedral, and we see Abra going through this in just a bit. In the book, she then relays to Danny everything she learned from the files, and this is how he knows to use the red steam as a way to weaken her. Rose's hand then gets trapped, and Abra appears with her face blanked out on the bed. That and the wig are supposed to help hide her identity and make her seem scarier to Rose. And again, it's of course playing off Emerald. Rose then has to rip her hand out, and I always love the degloving scene here. It's the first time the villains seem vulnerable, and she's just yeeted back to the RV and tossed off the roof. It's a complete opposite to the calm and elegant flying she did on the way there, and is such a good way to close out the scene. To make matters worse as well, Flick is now cycling and dying. We see as Andy's very distraught because she thought they lived forever, but now she's witnessing the horror that awaits her. Rose then goes to comfort Flick, with her speech being new for the movie.
I'm scared.
No, you're not. You watched empires rise and fall. She had the gladiators in Rome sailed across oceans to new worlds. While you fed on kings and princes and popes. They wrote myths of you and made statues. And they trembled in their villages and beds and skyscrapers. So no, you're not scared.
Now, this shows not only how highly she thinks of the True Knot, but she's basically doing the same thing that Danny does to his patients, even down to the point of saying that he shouldn't be scared of death. As we see though, it doesn't work, and he dies a horrifying, nightmarish, agonizing death on the floor. It's even more graphic in the book as well, and the Knot then desperately scramble at him. Though they've hammered home the idea they're all a group, this highlights how the individual survival comes above everything else. Dan then goes to Bill for help, and we get the classic helicopter shot of the car driving like in The Shining. In the book, he actually goes to Mr. John, and that's who he goes travelling with to Bradley. Mirroring Rose, we then see Abra meditating on the bed and appearing in the back of Danny's car. She does this a few times in the book to trick the Knot into thinking she's somewhere totally different, and even stays at her friend's house for a while just to throw them off. She then demonstrates her powers to Danny, and we see that his memories are kept in the Overlook. There's the classic Atlas typewriter there in the main hall, which was of course used by his father. Like the spirits he's trapped, he's also mentally trapped at the hotel and unable to really break free from here. Cutting back to the True Knot, Crow Daddy says that Rose shouldn't be there to grab Abra as she's been made. In the book, it's more her idea, and the Knot are currently mourning for Flick. There we read just how widespread the group are, as well as Crow mentions that he got the sedatives from the NSA. Now, though we don't get that here, we do get lip service to it later on.
They're rich, connected. I don't think they're worried about the police.
He then assures her that he can capture Abra while Danny and Billy arrive at the ethanol plant. Billy has basically assumed Dr. Rolls right now and takes up much of his dialogue. This whole sequence is sped up though, as in the novel they took flights and also stayed at hotels and just kind of discussed Danny's power. Billy really struggles with how Danny might just be crazy, but does say, look, if you're crazy, that's something I can work with. If Danny's right though, and there are indeed vampiric psychic beings that travel across the land sucking steam from kids, it's infinitely worse. In the book and film, Danny then tells Abra to leave as he doesn't want her to see them dig up the body. Abra defiantly says she can handle it, but Danny knows it could really traumatize her. As they dig, Billy then tells the story about how he went hunting when he was younger and clipped a deer, which then seemingly vanished without a trace. 5 days later, he came across it dead and says the smell was the same thing as what's here. I do wonder if this played into his shine as well, as smell of course is a sense. So potentially him smelling that was a way of indicating that he was close to death. Kind of similar to how Danny tasted blueberries before. Because I don't know if they'd smell Bradley through this dirt. They do find the glove though and take this to Abra, and this is different from the source material as Danny tries to find the Knot right after finding it. It's a really sad moment though, and they learn that Bradley actually named his glove after his favourite player. In the book, they also wonder what to do about the body, as they do think, shit, we might get caught and get the blame for this. They do kind of cover their tracks though, and even bought a spade from the next town over, which is very smart. Dan then asks Abra to tell her parents what's happening so they can be aware of what's going on, and if vampires show up to the door, they're a bit more prepared. Heartbreakingly, she then says how they almost think she's normal. Shows how dangerous things are though, and goes against Danny's warning from earlier about keeping a low profile. Obviously, her dad isn't happy when two grown men show up at the door saying they're on a crazy mission. And to be fair, I can totally understand why. However, Abra forces visions of the True Knot into his mind. She does this in the kitchen as well, and in the director's cut, we see shots of Bradley and what happened. He then shakingly drinks some booze, which plays in the theme of Danny drinking to dull his shine. You might also notice that from this point onward, Abra wears a red jacket, and this was deliberately picked to mirror Jack's outfit in the climax of The Shining. David suggests getting the police or FBI, and this may be a case for Mulder and Scully. Again though, Danny says they're connected, and I'd love it if we got a True Knot prequel or something, as they're such an intriguing group of villains. In the book, Dan also expands on things, saying that the story of a psychic girl against vampires will push them into the spotlight. The media will just eat it up, and he says it'll be exactly like the Balloon Boy. In case you don't know, this gained worldwide attention as a boy was apparently trapped in a balloon that was drifting across the planet. 'Twas all a hoax, but it kicked up a lot of media attention and was basically a nightmare to deal with. Danny then presents the glove to Abra, and she manages to find Barry and the rest of the Knot on their way to kidnap her. In the work, she sees that the measles are spreading and knows that they're living on borrowed time. She also explains that the rest of them are at a campground. Here though, they have Abra astral project and get the Knot hunting party to follow them so they can basically lay a trap. In the book, she then goes about her day at school and stays at a friend's, all while astral projecting and following where the hunting party are going. She then manages to trick the Knot that she's there by going into Dan's mind and body. Here though, she uses her cuddly bunny, which again kinda plays into Doc. The scene obviously plays off Violet's murder though, with the group all appearing through the trees. Barry then calls it parlor tricks, which is the name of this chapter, and we see as the characters then shot.
Fucking parlor tricks.
And yeah, I love that the master plan was just to lure them to the woods and shoot them from the distance. It's immensely satisfying to see the Knot get rocked like this though, and it's just something they weren't expecting at all. Hitting them causes them to cycle, and their bodies then disappear like when you kill someone on GoldenEye. In the book, Abra's dad was with Danny and Billy as well, and he shot a Knot member called Walnut. I do prefer that they kept him at home though, as it just raises the stakes when Crow Daddy arrives. In the book, Barry was the one tracking her mentally and saying that there was a ghost blip of her somewhere else other than the campground. Wisely, that's what Crow Daddy went to, and this is how he managed to get her on his own. They also managed to nick Andy as well, and we see she comes out to get Danny as he's reloading. Which, you noob point there, mate. She basically tells him to hit the thumbs up, and though he resists, he's quickly knocked out. Billy saves him though, and in a last act of defiance, she utters a horrifying final order to Billy. She dies laughing as he takes his own life, which is such a badass way to go, I will say. It's much better than what happens in the book as well, where she's just angry that she's been bested by some rubes. But that whittles down the numbers, and Crow then sedates Abra. David arrives waving a knife, which felt like a little nod to Wendy at the end of The Shining. Crow Daddy is so intimidating though, he doesn't care, very calm, and he just says that this is the best meal they're gonna have, and he wants to compliment the chef, which is such a great moment by the villain. In the book, you know, David survives the whole thing, but I think it just raises the stakes to lose both him and Billy.
Some of my people are dead. Some of yours are dead. Outcome didn't change, though.
In the novel, Crow Daddy then discusses things with Rose and even uses an unconscious Billy to keep Abra from acting out. For the film, though, things are at their lowest point now. Danny is all by himself, and he has to face down against these two powerful psychics. Well, one after what happens next. But upon returning to Abra's, he finds David and then stares at the bottle once more. We see him taking this home and almost drinking it. However, he defiantly throws it away and decides to try and reach out and get into Abra. The whole room tilts and he possesses the girl, which is when Kylie Curran does a fantastic job, I think. Like, she completely changes as Danny speaks through her. To pull this off, Ewan McGregor actually recorded himself saying these lines, and then Curran emulated them perfectly for the scene. Like the book, Danny then uses Abra's body to crash the truck. I love the way it plays out as well, with Crow arrogantly not wearing a seatbelt.
Makes sense if you think you're gonna live forever. Of course you wouldn't wear your seatbelt.
We then see Rose scream, and now she's the last one standing. plays out a little differently in the text though, as they're Abra's father with Danny ambush Crow. But yeah, either way, he dies, and on the way back, Abra encounters Rose in the middle of the road. Abra's completely unafraid though, so Rose takes the rest of the steam and basically shoots all the upgrades into herself at once. We also see her hand completely heal, but to be fair, it was pretty far along anyway. Chose or not, can recover from all wounds though, as long as they're not fatal. Danny then says that they'll go to the Overlook, which is a bit different to the book. There they're not, were camping at the Bluebell campsite, which is on the site of the grounds that the hotel was located at. When Abra was looking for the group, she mentioned the name, which scared Danny, and you can understand why. Danny theorized though that evil things like the Knot would feel at home there, purely due to the evil essence in the air. As we've talked about, it did burn down in the book, and they have their final showdown on the grounds there. Which, yeah, when you do a sequel to The Shining, you kind of want the hotel back. As we learn, Danny plans to use the powers of the Overlook to trap Rose, as he knows how dangerous this place is to people like them. Danny then fills up the car, and I did wonder if this was supposed to be Durkin's, which is where Dick stopped by on his way to save Danny. However, the exterior looks totally different. But yeah, to be fair, it's been 40 years. Anyway, that ominous opening music begins, and we enter the world of The Shining. We then fly over the island and up the mountain pass, and this scene is identical to the opening of that film. The final chapter title then pops in, with that being called Chapter 6, What Was Forgotten. Now this refers to the line, "You will remember what was forgotten from The Shining," which happens when Tony tells Danny that he will remember his prophetic dreams. Danny then remembered that line in Doctor Sleep, which took us to a chapter titled That Which Was Forgotten. It's here that Danny learns the truth about his father, and that Lucy was the forgotten illegitimate child. We then see as the pair arrive at the Overlook, which is closed and battered by the elements. Now, there was a deleted epilogue for The Shining that showed the manager visiting Wendy in the hospital and saying that nothing which Wendy described was found. Because of this, there were theories for like 40 years that, I don't know, maybe the hotel opened and they just kept on going. But due to the artifacts that we see lying around, it's clear that never happened. Guessing that two murderers living there probably caused some issues. Not having someone in over the window to keep the boiler running though, that meant the hotel was hit with weather problems, so they needed someone on site to save millions in repairs. However, if two of them died, I think they'd be hitting a point of thinking it's not worth it and they probably couldn't get insured. Jack had also been learning about its history, and we do know that it had a checkered past of stop-start openings and closings. So yeah, this all just was way too much and caused it to shut down, and it's now a shadow of its former self. Now, as for the final chapter in the book, though they're on the campgrounds, they take things up to an observation platform where they start astral projecting. But yeah, Flanagan massively improves it for the movie, and we see the place come alive in Danny's presence. He was described as being like a megawatt battery, and it's something that brings it back to life. He then goes back to the boiler room, which is recreated perfectly from The Shining, even down to the picture of the twin babies. He then walks down the infamous hallway where he saw the twins, and goes into the room where his family stayed. He sees the hole his dad made in the door, and then Red Room written under the door in the bathroom. Danny then recreates the most iconic shot in the original movie, and just to make sure the audience remembers, we have Wendy's reaction reshot with Alex Essos. Dan then follows in his father's footsteps and walks towards the gold room. Now there's actually a really nice additional Easter egg here, as we can see the mirror from Flanagan's film Oculus, which I wholeheartedly recommend if you want to see a really good horror film. Definitely cannot recommend this highly enough. Just like Jack, Danny's then offered some booze by the barman, who turns out to be none other than his father. Like Grady, Jack has now become part of the hotel and is the new Lloyd. Now, they obviously didn't get Jack Nicholson back, so they got Henry Thomas instead, who you may recognize from pretty much all of Flanagan's Netflix TV shows, and also E.T., yes, Little Elliot. But yeah, I'm glad that they just recast and didn't do de-aging here. It's Rogue One especially, that came out a few years before, and though I enjoyed it at the time, watching it now, I think it looks pretty bad, and I get distracted by the effect.
Slow night, Mr. Torrance.
Which is playing off a line that Jack had in the original.
A little slow tonight, isn't it?
The way this whole scene's shot though is simply incredible, with it just being an excellent recreation of the scene from the first film. Jack just plays dumb and says he doesn't recognize Danny, and it's clear that he's just a shell of his former self. He's only there to tempt and do the hotel's bidding, and has truly lost everything he was. Jack then says that Danny seems put upon and that men just want to do their work, and mate, 90-minute long YouTube videos, that's the way I want to spend my life. This refers to Jack being obsessed with his writing in The Shining though, and how he ended up hating Wendy for disturbing him. Danny just kind of ignores it and talks about what happened to their life after the hotel to see if there's any interest or recognition.
So we lived in Florida.
I'm sorry?
Mom and I.
He explains that Wendy couldn't look at him because she kept seeing Jack, and this kind of builds off that scene we saw earlier. He explains that he used his powers so she never saw Jack's eyes in Danny's ever again, and that may have been why he smiled at the mirror. The situation's reversed though, and eventually Danny couldn't look at her when the death flies covered her. So in her final days, she just lay there dying while Danny looked away at something else. She passed away when he was only 20, and losing both at that age makes you really sympathetic to him and does kind of explain why he became an alcoholic.
Don't you want to hear about it? She was your wife.
I think you've mistaken me for someone else.
Jack then offers something warm to help his sadness, and he says,
"Your money's no good here. Orders from the house."
"Your money's no good here. Orders from the house."
Danny replies saying it will cost him 8 years, which is of course the length of time he's been sober for. Danny then says,
Man takes a drink. The drink takes a drink. And then the drink takes a man.
This is actually an old Irish proverb that talks about the downfall that one has when becoming an alcoholic. It all starts with a choice though, and the man has to choose to be the one to consume it. Eventually though, the drink takes control, and this leads to dependency and ruin. Danny is choosing not to drink it and not playing to the hotel's tricks, so Jack then calls it medicine.
Medicine.
This of course plays into the line that Tina's father said, and in case you've forgotten because it's been so long, it's also what Danny said at the start.
So tell me, pup. Are you gonna take your medicine?
You're gonna take your medicine.
This scene is all about Danny at the end of his journey though, and finally coming to terms with his trauma. He has turned away from taking that medicine and has now resisted temptation.
The mind is a blackboard. And this is the eraser.
Which is a line that Danny kept thinking in the book. I love this monologue here as well, as Jack justifies the drinking as a method to cope with life. He sees his wife and kid as people who ate up his time, and they were just a hindrance on his life. In reality, he was just an inadequate father, and the booze helped him cope with those clear inadequacies. This made him step away from facing the truth and the fact that he wasn't there in a way that they needed him to be. One thing I didn't actually realise before writing this breakdown is that Mike Flanagan himself was actually in recovery while making this movie. While writing this bar scene, Mike actually realised he needed to get sober, and doing this scene made his attitude towards alcohol change. During production, he then got sober, which is a really interesting story, and you can really tell he put a lot of himself into the movie, much like how King did when he wrote The Shining. Knocking it away, Jack then channels Grady as he apologises for the mess and offers to get him cleared up. The suit completely changes, and we travel to the bathroom, which is shot identically to the scene in The Shining. This wasn't in the theatrical cut, and it's one of those moments I'm like, oh yeah, they did shoot that bit. Like I'll see on Google, like, you missed this scene in Dr. Seaton. I'm like, I did miss it, mate. I watched the wrong version. Jack then questions why he should be paying Abra's tab, and that he can just bring her inside and let the hotel have their way. Like Grady, he says that the management's concerned and that all they want is the girl. The pair even switch back and forth to highlight how they're jumping back and forth between the decision that Jack made to sacrifice his own child. Danny, of course, ends up being possessed by the hotel as well, so it nicely just foreshadows that eventual moment. This scene is broken up though, as Abra tells him psychically that Rose is arriving. In the book, Danny then used the inhaled steam of the dead grandmother to kill nearly all of the remaining True Knot.
This place is sick. Sick like my mama was sick.
And I did wonder if that line was a carryover from another version where the grandmother was included. They then spot an axe, and Rose arrives and enters the hotel. The Overlook tries to mess with her though, and we see blood from the elevator, albeit at a different angle. To her though, this is like a theme park, and she finds the theatrics very entertaining. She then enters the main hall and sees Danny with the iconic axe, which Flanagan apparently got to keep. The typewriter is still there as well, and even the chair's tipped over on the ground. This is some great attention to detail, and also shuts down any theories that the Overlook may have reopened. Once again, Obi-Wan has the high ground though, and they both send her to the maze in Danny's mind. It becomes a literal retread of Jack's chase to get Danny, where the young lad bested his father. Rose even says, "Where are you, pup?"
Where are you, Pop?
Which is something that Jack also said in that film. Abra has learned some tricks though, as she splits herself in two and cuts Rose multiple times. This kind of plays off The Shining as well, as Danny tricked Jack by making it seem like he went one way when he really went another, and sort of split in two. Reach? In the book, this was actually Danny and Abra punching her one at a time, but I think you're always going to have issues when a guy hits a woman in a movie, so best to avoid it. Like, I even remember when X-Men Apocalypse came out and people were kicking off because the villain choked Mystique, and it's like, it's the villain. But yeah, Abra also says,
Pain purifies steam. Fear too, so you understand.
Pain purifies steam. Fear too, so you understand.
You might also notice that the weapon's the same here, showing how Abra's adopting the tactics of Rose. Rose is almost locked in a box, but unfortunately she escapes just in time. She then offers Danny a deal after having no idea how they managed to miss him. She says there'll not be any more hangovers, and to be fair, I don't know if I could turn down Rebecca Ferguson, mate. Abra, where are you? Come here. As she goes up the stairs, we also have a repeat of Jack's actions while Danny stands in the place of Wendy.
Eat well. Live long.
Which is the enticement that she used to get Andy to turn. However, he'd just be like one of the ghosts at the Overlook and ultimately trapped like his father. Danny gets a chop in, but Rose nicks an artery, which is a major change from the book. It puts him on a path towards death and ultimately seals his fate. As he's down, Rose starts to feast on him and she sees memories including lots of things she shot from the previous film. These include Jack chasing Danny, the red room door, staircase, Mrs. Massey and the twins. She then notices he's not alone in his head as Danny releases the ghosts to feast on her. This is kind of similar to something that happens in the book, as there Danny uses Horace Derwin to take out the True Knot. Rose then had a massive fall from the observation tower and then started to cycle, but I do prefer what the film does where we see her being feasted on by the ghost. We even get a top-down shot of them holding her down, which is framed in the same way that the True Knot feast on their victims. So it's a really satisfying end for the villain, and we see that there's nothing left but her hat. The fact that the twins do it as well just nicely plays into how they targeted kids. The two girls then say,
Hello, Danny. Come and play with us. Forever. And ever. And ever.
Which is of course a callback to this.
Hello, Danny. Come and play with us.
Speaking of that scene, we then see as Abra encounters them down the same corridor that Danny did, and it's here that Danny reveals he's been possessed. He chases her just like Jack did, even limping because of his nicked artery, and we see she runs into Derwent and then Grady. This part is inspired by the book, and at one point Rose actually tricks Danny into choking Abra. But for the movie, I do actually prefer the way they do this, and she dashes into room 237, which, as we know, is the heart of the house. It's here that she sees Massey's return, which foreshadows her return later on. It's at this point that Danny then arrives, and Abra calls Danny a false face, which is something Danny called a ghost in the Shining book. His final test is to overcome the hotel's control, and Danny's tricked the hotel into overlooking the boiler room. Stopping the axe, Danny then gets control, and with Abra's help, he's able to loosen its grip. He then tries to go to the boiler room to sort things out, but Danny manages to stay his hand. Steam then fires off, which I did find rather fitting, and eventually this turns into fire. In the blaze, he finally sees his mother's face, and after going back to being a little boy, the pair go to the afterlife. Now, the film does kind of tie with the fact that Danny could have survived, and I have to admit, seeing him in Abra's room, they did get me the first time.
I knew you were okay.
Yeah, you got me, mate. But obviously he's now playing the dick role and visiting Abra as a mentor from the afterlife. The book, though, that has him going 15 years sober, and he warns Abra about the rage and alcoholism that runs in their family. Abra even gets drunk at a party when she's older and smashes some plates, which Dan warns her against doing. For the film, though, Abra recites to Ghost Dan how the hotel was screaming, which is similar how it's described in the Shining book. Danny then tells her to shine on, which is advice that young Danny needed.
Shine on, Abra Stone.
He talks about the dark things that exist in the world, but how someone like her could stand up against them. Lucy then comes in, and we realise Dan's a ghost, and she then tells her mother that she wasn't talking to anyone. However, outside, she says it's not true, and that she was talking to Uncle Dan. She then tells her mother that we go on, and that her grandmother and dad's okay, before then going off to trap Mrs. Massey. She even says, in a minute, just like Danny, showing that through this trauma, he's mentored someone new. The story has now come full circle, and she has moved on from her trauma and won't be haunted by it. To midnight, the stars and you, she closes the door, and that puts an end to the film. And I hope you've enjoyed us going back through it. I really enjoyed the movie, and I think Flanagan gave us a fantastic sequel that over the years I've just grown to appreciate more and more. You always run the risk of failing massively when the original is such a treasured piece of art, but he really delivered in so many ways, I think. And I hope you've enjoyed us going back to the Overlook, as I really enjoyed going back through these films. Huge shout out to Jared Bauer as well. Definitely go check him out. He does an incredible, much better analysis than me over at his channel. Yeah, and I think he'll really appreciate you watching the Exorcist breakdown and telling him in the comments how great I am. Please drop a like on this video as well, and drop a comment with all your thoughts below. If you want to follow us on Instagram and keep up to date with what we're doing, then you can also check us out at Heavy Spoilers. Members of the channel also get early access to videos like this every single week, at least 1 week early, but we're trying to do 2, and we're also trying to do 2 videos a week, but you will get at least 1, and it's just 99 cents a month. And it means that we can do these in-depth breakdowns that revisit classic films and really take our time with them. If not though, thank you so much for sitting through this video. I've been your host Paul as always. You've been the best, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care, peace.